If you've ever looked at your bank balance and felt your stomach drop, even though the number wasn't actually that bad, this story is for you. There's a particular kind of fear that has nothing to do with how much money you have. It has to do with how much you think you need. And most people never learn the difference until it's very late. Today, I want to tell you about a merchant who spent 15 years chasing a number, and a quiet old man next door who never seemed to chase anything at all. The old man's answer, when he was finally asked his secret, was only 7 words long. We'll get to those words, but first you need to understand the merchant because his hunger is probably a little familiar to you. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, what's the number in your head? The one that if you finally reached it, you think the fear would stop. Write it down, or just write, I have one too. You might be surprised how many people are carrying the exact same weight. The town sat where 2 trade roads crossed, in a valley thick with dust in summer and mud in the rains, and everyone who mattered in it knew the name Tarek. Tarek sold cloth, silk brought down from the northern passes, cotton woven in the river villages, dye the color of pomegranate that no other merchant in 3 districts could source. By 32, he had the largest stall in the market and the loudest voice at the merchant's table. And still, every night, he lay on his mat doing arithmetic in the dark. Not because he was poor, because he was afraid of becoming poor, and no amount of money had yet managed to answer that fear. Tarek's father had died owing money to 3 different lenders, and Tarek had watched, as a boy, men come to the house and take the furniture piece by piece, while his mother stood in the doorway saying nothing. He had promised himself, watching that he would never again stand in a room and feel that small. So he built. He expanded. He undercut competitors and outbid rivals and slept 4 hours a night. And by every outward measure, he had succeeded completely. And yet the fear had simply grown new rooms to live in. It used to whisper, "You might lose everything." Now it whispered, "You might lose everything you've built," which was somehow louder. Next door to his warehouse lived an old man named Devarim, who had once been a merchant too, though nobody quite remembered what he'd sold. Devarim kept a small house with a smaller garden, wore the same 2 robes in rotation, and every evening sat outside with a clay cup of tea, watching the road. His garden held nothing decorative. A row of onions, a fig tree that had never once produced much fruit, a wooden bench worn smooth by years of the same body sitting in the same spot. Tarek found this mildly irritating. A man who had clearly once had money and now had almost none should look worried, he felt. He should be scheming, rebuilding, hungry the way Tarek himself was hungry. Devarim never did any of it. He simply sat and watched the road and seemed to want for nothing, which struck Tarek as either a kind of surrender or a kind of secret he wasn't yet clever enough to see. But what Tarek didn't know was that Devarim was, by that point, one of the wealthiest men the town had ever produced. And almost nobody knew it, because Devarim had spent the last 20 years making sure nobody needed to. It started, as these things often do, with an insult. At a merchant's gathering, a younger trader made a joke at Devarim's expense. Something about a man who used to be somebody, now content to grow cabbages. The table laughed. Tarek, sitting nearby, expected Devarim to bristle, defend himself, remind them who he used to be. Instead, the old man simply smiled into his tea and said, "You're right, I am content," and changed the subject. Remember this detail, it matters later. Tarek couldn't let it go. Over the following months, he began finding reasons to walk past Devarim's garden in the evenings. A question about a shipment, a comment about the weather, and each time the old man would offer him tea and ask nothing in return. And each time Tarek left feeling strangely unsettled, the way you feel when someone answers a question you didn't ask out loud. One evening, he finally asked directly, "You were richer than any of us once. What happened?" Devarim considered this for a long moment. "Nothing happened," he said. "I still have most of it." Tarek assumed he'd misheard. "Then why do you live like this? Why let them mock you at the table?" "Because," Devarim said, "the mocking costs me nothing, and defending myself would have cost me everything." And this is where everything changed for Tarek, though he wouldn't understand it for another year. He began, without quite admitting it to himself, to study the old man the way he'd once studied competitors. He noticed that Devarim woke before dawn but never rushed, that he ate the same simple meal each day and never seemed to crave more, that he lent money quietly to 2 families in the district and never once mentioned it, and Tarek only learned of it by accident, from the families themselves, who spoke of the old man the way you speak of someone you'd take a blow for. He noticed that Devarim owned exactly 1 good robe, saved for funerals and weddings, and wore it without apology and without display. He noticed that when a flood destroyed half the market stalls one spring, Devarim was the first person there the next morning, not with sympathy, but with lumber and rope, already working before anyone thought to ask. 10 small habits. Tarek began to count them privately, the way he once counted profits, keeping the tally in his head, the way a man keeps a ledger he's ashamed to show anyone, waking before dawn but never rushing, as though the day owed him nothing, and he owed it nothing back. Eating the same simple food without craving more, without eyeing another man's plate at the merchant's table. Owning few things and displaying none of them, so that a stranger passing through town would never have guessed what he was worth. Lending money quietly to families who needed it, and never once bringing it up again, not even when those families thanked him in public, and he waved the thanks away like smoke. Working before being asked, first at the flood, first at any small crisis in the street, hands already moving before anyone had finished explaining what was wrong, speaking rarely of money, and when he did speak of loss, speaking of it the way you'd mention weather from a season long past. Meeting insult without argument, the way he had at the merchant's table, letting the mockery pass through him instead of lodging somewhere. Keeping exactly 1 good robe, saved for funerals and weddings, worn without apology and without pride when the occasion called for it. Sitting still in the evening with absolutely nowhere he needed to be, the clay cup warm in his hands, the road empty in front of him. And beneath all 9 of these, Tarek slowly began to sense a 10th habit, quieter than the rest, the root the other 9 seemed to grow from, though he couldn't yet name it. But what he didn't know was that Devarim had once been exactly like him, richer, faster, angrier, until the year he lost almost everything in a single flood on the river route, and discovered, to his own shock, that he was still standing afterward, still fed, still respected by the people who mattered, still, in every way he could actually feel, whole. Tarek's own reckoning came the way these things usually do, not gently. A shipment of northern silk, his largest order of the year, was lost when the caravan was raided in the mountain pass. Half his capital, gone in an afternoon he never even witnessed. He spent 3 sleepless nights certain his life was ending, replaying his father's doorway, the men carrying out the furniture, his mother's silence. On the 4th night, half out of desperation, he walked to Devarim's garden long after dark and sat down uninvited. The old man didn't ask what was wrong. He simply poured a 2nd cup of tea and waited. "I've lost half of everything," Tarek finally said, "and I don't know who I am without it." Devarim was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the only question he ever really asked. "Tarek, what do you actually have left tonight? Not what you've lost. What remains right now in this moment that no caravan raid can touch?" Tarek started to answer with numbers. The warehouse still standing, the stall, the remaining stock. And Devarim shook his head. "Not that. That can be raided too. I mean, what's actually yours?" And Tarek sat in the dark garden, and for the first time in 15 years, he stopped calculating. He thought of his wife asleep at home, unbothered by the shipment, because she'd never measured him by it. He thought of his own 2 working hands, which had built a business once and could do it again. He thought of the fact that he had eaten that day and would eat tomorrow, and that the fear in his chest, when he actually looked at it directly, instead of running from it, was pointing at a future that hadn't happened yet, not at anything true in this exact moment. "I asked you once what happened to your fortune," Tarek said quietly. "You never really answered." Devarim set down his cup. "I'll answer now, if you actually want to hear it, because I don't think you were ready before." He looked at the road, empty and dark. "The flood didn't change me. What changed me was the morning after, when I realized I was still alive, still capable, still surrounded by people who loved me for reasons that had nothing to do with silk or silver. And I asked myself what I had actually been afraid of losing all those years. It wasn't the money. It was some number in my head that kept moving further away every time I got close to it. So I stopped chasing the number. I stopped counting the things I lacked." 7 words. Tarek turned them over that night and for many nights after, and slowly understood that they weren't a riddle to be solved once and forgotten, but a habit to be practiced daily, the way you'd practice any skill worth having. Here is what that old man in the garden understood, and what took Tarek 15 years and one flood to learn. Wealth and safety are not the same thing, and most of us spend our whole lives trying to buy safety with wealth, which is a bit like trying to fill a hole in the ground by pouring water into it. The hole was never the shape water could fill. Fear about money is rarely about the actual number in your account. It's about an old, unhealed belief that you are one bad month away from being unworthy of love, or shelter, or belonging. Devaram wasn't wealthy because he had money left after the flood. He was wealthy the moment he stopped needing the money to answer a question that money was never built to answer. This is the concept underneath every one of those 10 small habits you may have noticed as this story unfolded. Sufficiency. Not accumulation, not austerity either. Simply the quiet, practiced knowledge of what you actually have right now that is already enough to stand on. It is the 10th habit, the one Tarek couldn't name in the garden that night, because it isn't really a habit at all in the way the other 9 are. It's the ground the other 9 are built on. You can copy a wealthy man's routine, wake early, eat simply, dress plainly, and still lie awake at night doing arithmetic if underneath it all you still believe you are one bad month away from disaster. The habits without the belief are just performance. The belief without any of the habits is just a feeling that fades by morning. Devaram had both, and that's why the garden felt the way it did to sit in. That merchant checking his account for the 17th time today, hoping the number will finally make him feel safe. That's you sometimes, isn't it? And the number never does make you feel safe, because you're asking it a question it was never designed to answer. Money can buy shelter, but it cannot buy the feeling of being safe. Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy the feeling of being enough. Somewhere along the way, most of us quietly confuse the two, and we've been trying to solve an emotional equation with a financial tool ever since, and wondering why the answer never quite balances. So here is what you can actually do with this, starting tonight, not someday. First, before you sleep tonight, write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already own. Not gratitude in the abstract, specific things. The particular way a person in your life says your name, your own 2 hands, and whatever they're still capable of building. The fact that you woke up this morning and were, in that moment, enough. Keep the list somewhere you'll see it the next time fear wakes you at 3 a.m. Second, pick one small habit from Devaram's 10 and practice it for a single week, not forever, just 7 days. Eat one meal without rushing. Wear something ordinary without apologizing for it. Do one piece of work before anyone asks you to. Lend something small, an hour, a tool, a little money if you can. And don't mention it again, not even to yourself. Notice what it feels like in your body to act like a person who already has enough, even on the days your bank account disagrees. You are not trying to fool yourself. You are trying to remind a very old, very frightened part of you what the truth actually is. Third, the next time you catch yourself doing arithmetic in the dark, stop and ask yourself Devaram's question instead of your usual one. Not, how much have I lost? Ask, what remains right now that no raid, no flood, no bad month can touch? Answer it honestly out loud if you have to. This single question, practiced enough times, becomes the quiet floor beneath everything else. Picture the old man in that small garden as the light finally goes, the tea gone cold in his hands, the road outside empty and unremarkable, and nothing about the scene suggesting he was, by any measure that mattered, one of the wealthiest men the valley had ever known. Tarek rebuilt in time and became a wealthier merchant than he'd ever been before the flood. But he tells people now that the real fortune wasn't the silk or the silver he recovered. It was one evening in a stranger's garden when he finally stopped counting what he lacked and started noticing, for the first time in 15 years, everything he'd already had. You are not behind. You are not one bad month from being unworthy. Whatever the number in your head is tonight, it was never going to be the thing that made you safe. Only you can do that, by finally counting what remains instead of what's missing. If this story gave you even one quiet moment tonight, there are more waiting for you here. Next time, I'll tell you about a lamp maker who was offered a fortune to make his lamps burn brighter, and what he chose to make instead. Until then, walk gently, hold loosely,